Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. This is Michael Harding with On the Arts. Again, for those of you who aren't sure what it is that we do here, this is a show that's all about revealing these little artistic secrets that we have around in southern Utah. Again, people know the hiking, they know the sports, they know that Dixie State University is here, they know the high schools and such, they know that there's tremendous red rock. But what they may not be aware of are the artistic offerings that we have. And it's my pleasure, actually, to have many guests on this show that are working artists, that are working professionals who can enlighten us to these opportunities that are down here. We've had some wonderful guests in the past. We've had filmmakers. We've had Dan Folks and Adam Mast. We've had Mayor John Pike on to talk about what's going on artistically around town. We've also had singers, Paul Weens and Rachel Cox, and we've had Kathy Cecilwitz, the curator of the Sears Gallery, as well as many other guests. We even had Melinda Vaughn call in from SUU and up north, and her work with the Statera Foundation. I'm very proud of the fact that we have so many people that can talk about their individual areas of the arts. Now, today we have a very special guest, a gentleman by the name of Shane Christensen. Shane, how are you today?
Good. How are you doing?
I'm doing real well. I do want to give a little promotion as well to our Thursday show. That's going to be Karen Edwards and her son, Cade. Now, those of you who don't know, Karen Edwards is the company manager for that little teeny theater out there in the desert, Tuacahn. And she'll have, I'm sure, a lot of insight for us. She has a wonderful background in theater. Professional stage manager as well as company manager, all sorts of experience. And her son, Cade. Cade has done a lot of work on stage here in St. George with St. George Musical Theater and some of the other organizations. But he also has a little bit of a film career going on. So we'll have a lot of interesting talk going on Thursday. Now, I do want to let everyone know as well that On the Arts, as fun as it is, we're actually going to be taking a bit of a hiatus this summer. And that's just, I'm very proud to say that I do have some contracts lined up and things of that sort as an actor and a director and a playwright. So I won't be here to actually host the show, but we will pick up again in the fall. Keep your ear to the ground. And just so you know, you can listen to any of our past shows by visiting Radio St. George on Facebook. Again, that's Radio St. George, RADIO space ST space GEORGE, where we are actually broadcasting live right now. If you'd like to see what these two amazingly handsome gentlemen actually look like, check out Radio St. George on Facebook, and we're also on YouTube streaming live. Now, to give a little introduction to my guest today, and we're going to talk about ceramics and art and things of that sort from his perspective, I always start with a little bit of an expositional story of myself, if you will. Now, I want to express to everyone my absolute dedication and brilliance as far as ceramics and pottery goes. I'm going to tell you some of my award-winning experiences long time ago when I was a little more height challenged than I am now, back when I was in the elementary ages, if you will. I was introduced to clay and the working of clay. And I remember making what they called thumb pots, where we'd have...
Yeah, a thumb pot or a pinch pot. They call it a pinch pot.
Pinch pot.
You make it with your thumbs.
Yeah. You see, that's how big of an expert I am on pottery and ceramics. But I want to let you know that I was so amazed that I could take this lump of clay and I could make something that was useful, an ashtray or a jelly bean bowl or something like that. And I was bitten by the bug, if you will, for ceramics. So a week later, in art class in elementary school, we learned how to make animals, and I was brilliant at making snakes with clay. I don't know how many of you have been out there in elementary school learning to roll the clay between your hands, and I just did a visual. Sometimes I forget that I'm on radio, and you can't really see that unless you're looking at Facebook. But I made all sorts of snakes, and I was so excited because I had my snake farm, and my friends were doing boring things like cows and crocodiles, but I was fantastic at making snakes. And I came up with the idea. This is the brilliance of myself as an artist. And this was 3rd or 4th grade, so you can imagine I was quite a savant with ceramics and pottery. And I remember thinking, I don't have to have all the snakes laying out on the desk. What I could do is I could stack them and make walls of snakes and make actual log cabins. So I started making my log cabin, and my teacher was amazed, as she should have been. I believe her name was Mrs. Hoyle, if I can remember back that far. And I thought, wow, I am an artist. I made this little log cabin. And something I noticed that was a weakness of mine was making anything with a right corner, with a 90-degree corner. So that's why the snakes were perfect for me. I could twist them around, and it was okay if my walls were curved. Now, this is very influential into my later work, and by later I mean 2 weeks later when we went back to art class. The teacher was so inspired by my willingness to create a wall with snakes that she decided to have us actually build or put together structures. And she taught us how to flatten out the clay, and we got to cut out these walls and such. Now, I mentioned that I'm not good at right angles. So I would cut them out as best I could, but none of my walls would stand. So I decided to call upon my ceramic brilliance, and I took a little lesson from my snakes before, and I started curving my walls. And instead of having corners, right corners, I had a round house. It was kind of like a little hut. And then I came up with the idea, because I was running out of clay. I hope everybody's seeing the trend here, that there is no brilliance whatsoever in my history with ceramics. But because I was running out of clay, my walls kept getting smaller and smaller. And I thought, well, I'll stack them on top of each other. And I want you to know that at Westgate Elementary School in Virginia, in Manassas, Virginia, it is, well, I don't know, I'm imagining it's a trend now, or it's a tradition, that they make lighthouses instead of standard cabins or standard houses because of the work of a young, aspiring artist, Michael Harding.
I'm sure that might be the case.
I'm sure it might be, but emphasis on the word might.
Yeah.
Now, please know I did retire from ceramic work after the 3rd grade, so I don't really have many wonderful, exciting stories to tell about my continuing work. But luckily, my guest today on the show, Shane Christensen, has a little bit more experience, and I'm sure he has heard my name in the ceramics world. But Shane, welcome to the show. Thanks for being with us.
Yeah, thanks for letting me be here. It's a great opportunity. Sounds like you would have been great if you just would have kept pursuing clay.
You know, they couldn't mold me into the proper artist. Yes, that was a terrible, terrible pun. But Shane, I actually had a little bit of a difficulty trying to figure out how to introduce you, and this actually shows my ignorance towards your genre of art, your form of art. I don't know what to call you, a ceramicist, a potter?
Well, so, you know, some people, there's a lot of controversy of that out in the clay world, but a lot of people call themselves ceramic artists, but I generally make vessels, so I call myself a potter.
Oh, fantastic.
But you could, you know, a ceramic artist or potter.
Well, I mentioned that I had done pinch pots and thumb pots.
Yeah.
I think I gave that to my grandmother as a gift. And I want to let you know, and this is for anybody who wants to experience Shane's work, if they can't make it to one of his showings or the gallery when we have things displayed, if you come by my office here on campus, I have this little dish, and Shane actually handed out these dishes at our last chairs meeting as gifts for everybody. So I've got it sitting proudly displayed on my desk, and that's what I love about ceramics. You can make gifts to the end of the day.
I don't ever give wedding gifts. I give ceramic gifts.
I think that's wonderful.
Yeah,
actually.
so we don't have to buy wedding gifts, I should say.
So tell me, Shane, how do you get into this besides in 3rd grade making these innovative things?
I don't know. I think we were much alike in a lot of ways. For me, I was always attracted to art. I used to draw and be creative like that. But what really got me into ceramics is my sister, when she's quite a bit, about 10 to 12 years older than me. When she was in high school, she took a ceramics class, and my oldest sister and I are very creative, and she said, "Oh, you would love this class." And so as an elementary student, I was like, I can't wait to take ceramics. I can't wait to take ceramics. And for some reason, I just had that in my head. And when I became a sophomore at the high school, I mean, I took art classes all the way through. That was my strong point. I took a ceramics class, and I just fell in love with the medium. And it almost stopped me from even working in painting and drawing. Even though I still do painting and drawing, I focus in ceramics now. So, but that was kind of what got me started. And so that was a big deal for me.
Got it. Well, you mentioned that you do painting and drawing as well and such. How much crossover is there between the two forms of art?
Well, I think you can do it. You know, there can be a lot. It depends on what you do and what your work is. For students and for teaching purposes, I've always pushed drawing and composition and figure drawing. And when I was in college and graduate school, every semester I'd take a figure drawing class. And for me, that was the key, because that's what got me into art in the first place. And that's how you see with your eye and then translate into your hand. And the same process is when you come up with an idea for a vase or a form, you're seeing that in your mind's eye, and then you either sketch it out and then you try to make it three-dimensionally. And so they're very closely related. And so I think figure drawing and sculpting or throwing on the wheel are very much closely related, and they're kind of hand in hand.
And what do you mean by throwing on the wheel? Just define that.
So there's several ways you can do pottery. You can hand build pottery, and traditionally there's three types of hand building. There's pinch, which you were talking about with your thumbs, using your thumbs and making a little kind of bird's nest and start.
I'm an expert at pinch pots.
Pinch pots, yes. Yeah. And then you've got coil, which you discovered on your own. That's why your teacher thought you were amazing.
Well, I may have been exaggerating there just a little bit.
Well, I've always told my students when they make a handle, they learned how to do this in elementary school, but most students can't roll snakes. So the fact that you can roll a snake, then you're already ahead of most. But there's pinch, coil, and slab, and those are the basic hand building techniques. A lot of Native American pottery, I'd say about 50% of the pottery in the world is done in this technique, and then the other 50% is probably done on the wheel. And throwing on the wheel would be spinning clay on a wheel and using the centrifugal force and kind of trying to defy gravity to create an object. So it's a little bit of a challenge.
Well, got it. I'm imagining, because of course I don't have a lot of experience myself of throwing pots on the wheel. I'm imagining it's a lot more difficult than it looks. To me, it seems like every child who's emotional, and this is one of my pet peeves, whenever a child throws a tantrum at church or something like that, you always have a parent or somebody else say, oh, they're so dramatic, they're going to be a wonderful actor, they have a knack for it. And I'm like, no, they're just throwing a tantrum, really. I think a lot of people look at people throwing a pot or shaping clay on a wheel and thinking, oh my goodness, that's easy, anybody could do that. How do you respond?
Well, it's kind of a skill that you have to learn, much like drawing's a skill. But there are people that have different aptitudes that are more inclined to working on the wheel. Generally, people that have good hand-eye coordination, that can see something and translate it with their hands, do very well. When I was teaching in Texas, I taught at Western Texas College for 5 years in the early 2000s. And when I was there, we had a welding class, and a lot of the welding students would teach ceramics, and they did very well because they knew how to use their hands. Also, people that are mechanics. But if you've used your hands a lot, some people have that natural ability. So, it is a learned trait, and it takes time and patience. And maybe more than anything, it's patience and a desire to try to succeed in that area. So,
Got it.
It's a little bit challenging.
Yeah, I would imagine, this is just me speculating. By the way, I'm no good doing anything with my hands. You can ask my wife or anybody who's ever asked me to do anything that is manual labor. It's probably best for me to step back while somebody who knows what they're doing is actually working on that. I imagine if I were throwing clay on a pot, on a wheel, I would probably be one of those, shall we say, alternative artists who my piece would fall over and I would claim it was brilliant art.
That might be true. I think that's common when somebody makes a mistake. They'll say, "Oh, well, I meant that to be that way," but really, we know that it wasn't meant to be that way. When you get to the point in making artwork that looks abstract and then it's meant to be that way, that's a different thing. But I think it's a skill that people learn. I feel like in beginning ceramics, that's one of my expertise. I'm good at helping and seeing maybe what students are doing right or wrong, and then trying to reinforce that. So I think it's just a skill that it takes some time and effort, and everybody has different abilities. When I was a student, I just felt like I caught on to it immediately, and so that was kind of the natural draw to realize that, hey, I'm one of the better ones in this class, and I've never done this in my life, and so. But it's probably because I had little skills and attributes that I had developed as a child, or maybe I was born with, that allowed me to be a hands-on type artist. So,
well, I will say, and this is just my personal observation, you are a fantastic teacher.
Oh, thanks.
And I stand behind the notion that in order to truly teach something, you've got to be able to do it yourself. You've got to be a practicing artist in order to teach art. Let me ask you, where do you display your work? What do you do with it?
Well, since I've gotten hired at the university, I tend to just exhibit my work nationally and internationally. I've had shows in New York, and I just had one in Georgia and Florida, and so I have them all over the country. I had one I had a show a few years back at the Korean consulate in Los Angeles, and that was kind of a big show. But you know, I used to have a gallery representation in Zion National Park, but lately, since I've been teaching full time, it's more about making my work and exhibiting it. So I had a show at the St. George Art Museum 2 years ago, and so I just try to find venues that will exhibit my work, and I like to do workshops with it. So if I'm doing an exhibit somewhere, I like to say, you know, I like to show the students or people that are interested how my work is made. So that's kind of what I like to do.
That's where I always say that I think it's our responsibility as artists to share what we've done, whether it be teaching in an institution or whether it be running those workshops. I think you're a great example for this.
Mainly my work is sold through my studio, my home studio. So if somebody's interested in some of my work, if they've seen it somewhere, I usually just invite them to come to my studio and see what I'm making, and then they can kind of see if there's something they like.
Right.
So.
We'll start calling you the Chihuly of clay down here in
I'm a little far.
Utah.
I'm far from that, but
well, we're far just geographically from them. But I've seen your work; it's actually quite good. I'm proud to display it on my desk.
Thanks.
Well, also let me ask you, and by the way, this is something that I absolutely love about talking to Shane Christensen. He's a very diverse individual. This is not the only thing in his life. But before we move to other things, and I'll just give a little teaser here, things like pigeon races and mountain biking, and you mentioned the Korean consulate a little earlier, even things like Korean grunge bands or heavy metal bands. There's experience, and let me just put a teaser out there for our audience. Whenever I have a guest on, I usually try to have an audio clip of something that I can play, should we need to take a break for whatever reason, or sometimes just for fun. When I had Dan Folks and Adam Mast on for filmmaking, I had some Indiana Jones ready to go, and music such as that. When I had Kathy Cecilwitz on, I had some selections from Stephen Sondheim's Sunday in the Park with George. Well, in trying to think of something to play while Shane Christensen was here in the studio, should I need to go to that, all I could think of was the famous scene from Ghost, where you had Patrick Swayze and Demi Moore, and she was throwing a pot, and it actually became quite an interesting scene. We'll keep it that way. But it played Unchained Melody underneath. So if you hear Unchained Melody on this show, it just means we needed to take a break for whatever reason. And while I was telling Shane about this before the show, he also mentioned that he had done backup vocals for a Korean heavy metal band, and I'm proud to say that we were actually able to find one of those numbers on YouTube. So we very well may play that a little later on.
And I don't know if that particular song has my voice in or not, but we did. I have proof of that. There's.
What I'm going to ask is if we do play that you actually lip sync here so that people can see it on Facebook. But I mentioned before we get into some of the diversity, I do want to talk to you about kilns. And of course, we usually know there are ovens that you bake your ceramics in. And by the way, I know I'm using completely layman's terms for this, but I've never seen anyone get as excited talking about kilns as I have Shane Christensen. So I'm going to give the floor.
Okay. So Michael, just to correct you, you don't bake in a kiln.
No, I'm going to take, I am going to jump right back in here. Yes, you do. I have had pizza that
true.
you have made in
I've
a kiln.
made some pizza in the kiln, and I'm pretty proficient at that. But generally, we call it firing in the kiln. So we're going to fire the work. But we just recently had a kind of a big deal happen here at Dixie State. We built a wood kiln, and it's the first wood kiln in this part of Southern Utah. I think the first one in St. George that's ever been built since maybe pioneer days. I don't know, but it's called a train kiln, and it's a 60 cubic foot kiln, which is quite large. But what's unique about it is it was developed by a individual named, or he's a professor of art at Utah State named John Neely, and it's kind of an innovation. I read somewhere that some people feel like this was the first innovation in wood firing in 2,000 years. And so the fact that we could build this kiln, and we have had an expert builder come here and help us build it, was pretty amazing. And it's going to be exciting because really the students here haven't experienced that type of firing before. And it really puts you in connection with what you're doing. When I was in college, I was a wildlands firefighter. I don't know if you know this.
Yet another thing we'll talk about here.
And there was something about going and fighting those fires that's very exciting. what fire does when it gets kind of out of control is kind of exciting, maybe scary, but exciting. And when I was already into ceramics at the time, but I really didn't have that connection with making my work and then firing it in a traditional way and then seeing the results. And so the wood kiln, the first time I fired a wood kiln, I went to Utah State and fired their train kiln that they built up there. And that connection with firing a kiln with wood and seeing what the flame does to the pottery is pretty unique. And I feel like it's a great opportunity for us to have that, and we're thrilled to have that. It's been a big been a big deal in the making, and it's finally coming to fruition, and I'm pretty excited about it. So it'll be fun to see.
A wood kiln, does that just mean that the fuel is wood?
Yeah, it's fueled by wood. The difference between a wood kiln and a gas kiln or electric kiln, electric kiln, you put your work in there and you turn it on and then you leave and you go home and you come back and it's turned off. Or a gas kiln is very similar. You might have to watch it a little bit more, but it fires. But on a wood kiln, you have to sit there and put pieces of wood in that. And it takes about 30 hours to fire the kiln. So you can't do it by yourself. You need a little community of people to do it. But it's pretty exciting to sit there and generate over 2,000 degrees, up to 2,500 degrees of heat just by putting little pieces of wood in the kiln, and over time it generates that heat. It's pretty amazing, neat process. So.
Got it. Well, you mentioned that it's not baking, and please know, again, I'm using these layman terms, and by the way, I do digressions. That's what this show is going to be known for, On the Arts and Digressions by Michael A. Harding. But I mentioned that you made pizza in these kilns. Yeah. What I found so amusing is that there are different settings on kilns. I've learned a lot just by being here and working with artists and such. But I noticed that one of the settings actually had pizza written next to it.
Oh, yeah. There's so on the electric kilns, I'll tell you a little bit about how I started making pizza in kilns. It's kind of an unusual thing. After graduate school, I went to graduate school at Edinburgh University of Pennsylvania in northwestern Pennsylvania, and they, it's kind of the East Coast. I mean, people from New York probably wouldn't say Pennsylvania is the East Coast, but it's a lot farther east than Arizona and Utah. That's where I grew up.
Right.
But I was really I love the pizza back there. I love the food. There's a lot of ethnical food, a lot of diversity. Well, my first job I got was in West Texas, which was a rural area of West Texas, and there was really, a McDonald's, a Taco Bell, and I think a Pizza Hut in that town, and that was it. And so I thought, man, I really miss that, the pizza we had in the East Coast. It was, fired in brick ovens and stuff like that. So I started to develop a pizza, and the first time I put it, I thought, I don't have a brick oven, but I have a kiln, and so the kiln shelf is very similar to a brick oven. So anyways, the first time I put it on, I cranked the kiln to 1,000 degrees, and I put the pizza in there and just totally scorched it. Right. It was a nightmare. But over with trial and error, I kind of developed a temperature, and so on my kiln I have a program for pizza, and I have 2 kiln shelves that are dedicated just for pizza. So for those that are worried, that think, oh, maybe something's toxic in that kiln, there really isn't. Most of the elements of that would be toxic or volatile is at a higher temperature, and so the pizza temperature I usually go about 670, sometimes a little hotter. But anyways, I have 2 kiln shelves that I designate for pizza, and I put them in there, and I can go to 670 and cook a great pizza.
Well, I got to tell you, I'm happy to hear about the lack of toxicity because I've eaten some of these pizzas. So I don't, in 20 years, I don't want to.
Well, and really, there's a misconception with toxicity of materials in ceramics. A lot of times people think, oh, there's lead or something like that in there, and there are relatively low toxicity levels in everything we do now. Lead's illegal to use, so it's a relatively safe art form. I think the most dangerous thing is maybe breathing in the dust.
Got it.
And so it's pretty safe, and so there's not really anything that we get from that kiln. So it's good. So you're okay eating that pizza.
I'm glad. I was nervous just for a few moments when you mentioned that. But hopefully it's apparent to all of our listeners that Shane gets very, very excited talking about ceramics and pottery. And I have to say, even just in the few meetings that I've attended on even other subjects, I've learned a lot about it. Now, I mentioned earlier that there's a lot of diversity with Shane Christensen. And I'm just going to say a word and then see what happens. Pigeons. Talk to us about pigeons, Shane. Okay.
Well, it's a very old sport. And the funny thing is, when I was a young boy, my older brother was a Boy Scout, and he was getting his pigeon raising merit badge. They thought, oh, this is an easy merit badge to get. We can go get some pigeons off the local bank and then raise them and then basically earn that merit badge. So when he did that, after he got the merit badge, we were stuck with these pigeons. And so I liked animals, so I asked him if I could have them, and he gave them to me. And so I started raising pigeons. And so I've raised pigeons since I was probably 10 or maybe even 9 or 8 years old, something like that. And I always would race them just to my house from other places. If I'd go on a trip, I'd take them there and I'd let them go, and then they'd fly back to my house. I always thought that was amazing that pigeons can come back to an area and not know where they're at, and they'll come back home. But about 4 or 5 years ago, I've had pigeons off and on my whole life, and I've always loved pigeons. I think they're beautiful creatures. Most people think they're the rats of the sky.
Right, rats with wings.
That's right.
To quote Disney or Pixar.
Yeah,
or something.
but they're really beautiful creatures, and they're very clean, believe it or not. They take baths in water, and a lot of people think, oh, I think chickens are dirtier than pigeons. But anyways, I had some pigeons, and I put them for sale, and somebody here locally, it was actually George Scott, who used to run the student dorms. He's retired from teaching at Dixie State University, and he called me up and said, hey, I noticed you're selling some pigeons. Do you want to be part of our pigeon club? And I said, oh, I'd love to do that. I've never been in a pigeon club. And he says, well, we're a racing club. And so I said, okay. I said, I don't know what to do. And so anyways, he taught me a few things, and I've been racing pigeons now for pretty, I guess, seriously, if you want to call it serious, for about 5 years.
He's a pigeoner, ladies and gentlemen.
Yeah, pigeon racing. I'm part of the American Pigeon Association and all that kind of stuff. But I've had some success the last couple of years. I've had before last year, I had a couple of 3rd and 4th place finishes. But last year I had a 1st place finish in the it's called the Spring Break 300. It's a one loft race out of Beaver, Utah, and so my pigeon came in first of 7. So 7 came in together on the 350-mile race from Barstow, California to Beaver. And then just another little side note: this season I've won 2 races. I just recently won a race from Ingham, Idaho, which is 400 miles, and it's just south of Pocatello to St. George, and that was to my house. And so that happened on Saturday. So I've got an award racing pigeon in my loft. So.
How do you clock this? Do you have officials at everybody's house waiting for these pigeons?
Well, every pigeon racer has a clock, and then you sync them together when you basket your pigeons and take them to the race. And then you bring your clock back to your house. The pigeons have a chip on their ankle that's around a band, and when they come in, that stops the clock. And then it's electronic computerized clock, and then we'll turn those in, and we can find out who won the race. It's sky miles, and there's a GPS coordinates from my loft door. So it's a pretty interesting thing. It's kind of a fun sport. I'm always looking for that Olympic athlete of pigeons. So.
Well, it's funny you bring that up. The image in my head when you're training these pigeons is just, you've got these Olympic swimmers who they work with their different style suits and their shark tooth suits and things of that sort. And I just think, how do you groom these pigeons? How do you train them?
It's kind of the same thing. I mean, my friends tease me that I have little jerseys for them with numbers on them. I don't do that.
Do you, Shane?
No, I don't. but you do. You're looking for naturally gifted athletes. You want to train them. You give them proper nutrition, electrolytes, all those things, and you want them healthy. I think the biggest thing with pigeon racing is you want your pigeons healthy. If they're not healthy, they'll struggle. And there's lots of diseases with pigeons, with any kind of fowl, and so you just got to keep them healthy. But anyways, I've got one pigeon in particular that's been doing great this year, and he just keeps coming strong. So
he's the Kobe Bryant of your
in my loft he is. Right. So
well, let me ask you, how do you find? And I'm sorry to be spending so much time on the pigeons.
Good.
I find this fascinating. With your pigeons, how do you find these pigeons? Do you go to the store and say, "Show me your bin of pigeons"?
Well, it's not just any pigeon. So all pigeons home, and so there's a misconception that homing pigeons are racing pigeons. Racing pigeons are very specific, and they've been bred for racing over years and years and years. And I don't know if you knew this, but in Belgium, racing pigeons is a national sport. And so a lot of really famous pigeons come from Belgium, but a lot of these pigeons I've gotten from other members of the club, but then I'm trying to breed the traits that work for my loft. And so as I race the pigeons, I can say, well, this pigeon comes in fast, this one has good endurance, this one has good feathers or whatever, and then you're trying to get those traits and put them together and make a good racing pigeon. And so you're really looking for that that gifted athlete. And I know that seems strange to talk about, but it really is, and it's amazing what they can do. I mean, they fly 55 to 65 miles an hour all the way back for 400 miles, which is amazing.
Oh, how high up do they go?
They don't go as high as you think. I just recently read something that somebody was tracking their pigeons. They had a different device they could track them with, some new technology, and they were saying they were going as high as 11,000 feet. I don't know if mine do that, but I have let them go when on a basic training toss that would be up by Cedar City or Minersville Summit, and I've been driving back to St. George, and they pass me as I drive down the freeway. So,
really?
Yeah, they'll be on the side of the mountain flying down, and I've noticed they fly pretty low, but in general, pretty low is, a couple hundred feet above the ground. So.
Oh yeah, my vertical jump, really.
Yeah, yeah.
Well, how do you make them loyal to their home here?
Well, they naturally want a home. They naturally want to come back to their home. Pigeons love their loft. That's just what they love. And when you have racing pigeons, every pigeon should have its own spot, its own perch, because that's what they call home. But there's three things that really are incentives for pigeons. One is that they naturally home, and so you focus on food and comfort and those things. The other one is a partner or a mate. If they have a mate at home or a baby, they want to come home quickly to that. And then the other one is just, finding pigeons that just have no good natural homing ability. But really, there's a few incentives that gets them to fly fast. But like I said, all pigeons will home, but some fly faster than others. And what's amazing about it, you'll go on a 400-mile race and you let go 300 pigeons, and there will be one that comes in first. So there are pigeons that fly faster than other pigeons.
Gotcha. And you're looking for them, certainly.
Yeah, I'm looking for them. They're out there.
Right. And that's one of the great things about this show, I'm going to tell you, is I've learned so much from all of the guests on here. And I don't know how many of the listeners out there were aware that there was an American Pigeon Association.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah.
These races and such. And, I'm sure my wife would kill me, but I want to get some pigeons.
Cedar City has a club, and so does St. George, and we fly together sometimes. An interesting side note, color doesn't make a difference on how fast a pigeon is.
So no matter what jersey you put on.
Yeah, it doesn't matter. The color of the pigeon. Generally, white pigeons tend to stand out, and hawks like white pigeons better because they stand out. But if you have all white pigeons, then maybe a black one would stand out. So color doesn't determine the speed of the pigeon.
Well, we talk about the homing pigeons and such. Do you ever have the Mavericks, or what are the casualty rates of?
Well, you do have some loss. I mean, if the weather's bad, or we just recently in the last race we had a couple of losses in that, and part of that was because they said there was some solar activity, and sometimes solar activity or even the tide or whatever, we don't know what factors play into this, but sometimes it affects their ability to home. But in general, they want to come home. Sometimes it's a predator like a hawk or a coyote. Let's say it lands by a pond or something to get a drink, and a cat comes and gets it or something. But generally, they all want to come home. That's their desire, and it's not like they're forced to come home. They have the freedom to say, hey, I don't want to come home and I want to go somewhere else.
Get these rebel pigeons out there.
But if you notice St. George, there's no wild pigeons in St. George, but we've had pigeon clubs here for probably 100 years. And so we really don't have. We have lots of predators like falcons and hawks and things like that.
Is that why we don't have any wild pigeons around? Or?
Maybe it's just our climate's not great. One thing that's nice about St. George is we have lots of big mountains, and so for pigeon racing that's difficult. But because of that, our pigeons are very strong, and so we can send our pigeons to other races across the country, and they do very well because of the topography here is so extreme. But I don't know. There's a lot of pigeons in Salt Lake, but there's not many here. So I don't know why that is. Maybe there's more buildings, and they like the buildings.
Some place to loft, to call home, I'd say.
Yeah. I don't know if you knew this, but I think one reason why we see pigeons in cities and stuff is one of the most common pigeons in the world was the passenger pigeon, which was native to the United States. And I think in the 1910 or 1920, we eliminated it and made it extinct. And so I think that a lot of birds have taken that spot for the passenger pigeons. So you see a lot of blackbirds and sparrows and doves and even wild pigeons, and I think they've taken the spot of the passenger pigeon, which was a native bird to the United States. So,
Well, you mentioned a little bit ago the topography of
Yeah.
southern Utah and such. Now, I'm going to shift topics just a little bit. And what I love about talking to you, Shane, is I'm just going to give you key words.
That's good. Let's go
And you've
for
got
it.
great, interesting things to say on it. I'm just going to say mountain biking and talk to us about that.
Yeah, I mean, we live in the greatest state in the world for mountain biking. What's interesting, I've always been into cycling, and I've been cycling since I was a young boy, and I've been into the Tour de France. I love cycling as a
You were
sport.
in the Tour de France?
No, I just watched the Tour de France.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
I was, even beyond the Korean grunge thing, I was really excited.
No, I've loved cycling my whole life, but when I moved to St. George, mountain biking is great. And I lived here. I went to college at Dixie College in the 90s, and at that time mountain biking was just getting going, and we used to love riding. But when I went away to graduate school and I lived in Texas, I came back, I instantly got into mountain biking again because we just live in a fabulous place, and it's just a beautiful place to ride bikes. But it's kind of an obsessive thing. I think the more you do it, the more you want to do it. And we have absolutely beautiful trails in this area. In St. George alone, there's over 100 miles worth of trails. And then in the Hurricane area, there's at least 200 or 300 miles of trails. And it's just an amazing area. My son mountain bikes on the high school mountain biking team. And it's a great sport with great people in it, and it's just been a lot of fun to be part of. The only problem is my wife is always concerned because my legs get scratched up and scraped a lot. And so I have lots of scars from mountain biking, but I sure like it. It's a lot of fun.
I have to keep reminding myself of the title of the show. It's On the Arts. And, of course, we're talking mountain biking and pigeons and such. One of the great things I think that comes from this is having a conversation with Shane or many of our other guests is letting people know that artists are people, too. There is the stereotypical artist out there, the one who smokes the clove cigarettes and wears the beret and, people just don't get my art. Or they're these reclusive little, especially, I'm loving the term ceramicist, even though I know that's not the proper one.
No, that's the right term, I think.
Okay,
yeah,
got it.
You can be a ceramicist.
Well, I'd say Shakespeare made up words. I can too,
Yeah.
and if they catch on, that's great. But that they're these reclusive little people, who paint in their studio or craft. But we have a lot of really fun, interesting people here who are into the arts and such. Let me ask you, Shane. If people wanted to experience your work or the work of other artists around here, where would they go? How would they find out?
Well, I mean, you can. There's a lot. There's a Utah Potters website, and I can't remember. I think it's utahclay.org that you can see ceramic artists in the state of Utah. I also have a website if you go to Shane Christensen Ceramics or just Shane Christensen Pottery.
And that's CHRISTENSEN.
Yeah,
Yes.
that's right. And you can see my work there. But yeah, that's the main ways. On Facebook, I have some images of my work and stuff. But as what you're saying about all these things, I feel like all this is tied together. I feel like even though pigeon racing doesn't have a lot to do with it, but it has a lot to do with me, and so does the mountain biking. But I feel like there's a connection with my work, and I like to put a lot of genre in my work that ties into me personally, and some of it's historical family things, some of it is just things I'm interested in. I put a lot of imagery that is people don't really know what it is. For example, I'm sure you know of the weed that grows around here called goat head.
Yes.
It's a horrible weed that gets in bicycle tires. I've been taking pictures of that weed for years and putting it on my work, and people think these are sure pretty flowers, or what's this pretty plant on your pot. But it's a little bit of I do it as a love-hate thing because it is a beautiful plant, but I hate it because it pops through mountain bike tires. And so I just think there's a little bit of a juxtaposition there that I like, and I like that with a lot of my work. A lot of my work will have a little juxtaposition in it, and I think that's kind of fun and exciting. But so I try it. So for me, all the stuff's related. Like, it's all related. I can't really separate mountain biking, pigeon racing, teaching at the university, making my work. It's all kind of tied together.
That's a question that I have ready, my list of questions and such, for many of the artists that I deal with is, what is your inspiration? And I think you just covered it very well.
Well, it changes over time too. I think your focus as an artist sometimes can be really strong, and then it can vary. And lately, when I first started to make my work, it was all porcelain and it was soda fired, which is kind of a unique process. I have a soda kiln at my house. It's
A soda kiln.
it's a gas kiln, but you spray soda ash in it with water in a liquid, and it'll glaze the pots and glazes the kiln. It's pretty unique. We don't have one at the university, but it's a unique process, and so there's a certain flash that you get from that. And so it was really different work. It was very much symmetrical and geometric, and I think my newer work is a little loose, a little more abstract. But there is imagery on my work. I've been doing ceramic decals. I make my own decals, and a lot of it is either family pictures or historical pictures. And when I say family pictures, that sounds kind of maybe like cliche, or it's a little bit oh, he's putting pictures of his family on his pots. But it's not really that. If you see my work, I want people to think, oh, this is like, I don't want somebody to identify it. That's Shane's dad or his grandpa. I want them to look at it and say, oh, that's an image of a cowboy showing a grand champion steer, or that's a picture of a basketball player in the 1920s or something like that. I don't really want somebody to identify that it's my family in particular, but I'm pretty proud of my family and my family heritage. And so a lot of those images have a lot to do with me personally. Sometimes I just do something that I'm interested in. Maybe it's a bicycle sign. I've used bike route signs, and I've used images of endangered fish in the area and things like that. So like I said, the goat head weed, I use that on my work. And so it just depends on what I'm going for. It's always changing. I wouldn't say it's always going to be the same, but sometimes it's changing. So.
Well, that actually brings up a question that I would love to get your answer specifically on. And it's a very cliche question, but I'm finding the more I ask the cliche questions, the simple questions, the more interesting they're becoming to me, the more complex the answers, the more I'm being able to look into the souls of the artists that surround me. And I know that makes it sound so hoity-toity, looking into the souls, but getting to know the people that are around here that do the arts. And that is, why do you do this? Who do you do it for?
Well, I think originally when you're an artist, you do it for yourself. You do it because you have a desire to create. I think an actor has a desire to act. A musician has a desire to create music. And for me, it's a desire that I have to create and express myself. And there's something I'm drawn to. I feel like I've been given a God-given gift to be able to create things. And if I don't do that, I feel like I'm not being true to myself. And so for me, it's something that I feel like I have to do. But also a lot of the pottery, I mean, I give a lot of it away. I sell a lot of it. My family members have a lot of my work, but for me, more than anything, it's for me to make. So being a college professor, I don't have to sell my work to make a living because I teach at the university, but I do sell it, and I do make work for me because it kind of fulfills that spot in my soul that I need to create something. And so I just do it for myself, but a lot of times I want it to be appealing to other people. I love it when somebody uses one of my pieces, and then over the years they use it and use it and use it, and then maybe it gets broken, and then they're like, oh, I can't hardly live without this. This is my favorite cup. I really take satisfaction in knowing that somebody's using something that I made.
Right.
The one thing about clay that's unique, that's so different than any other medium, is, sometimes a fingerprint will be left on there, or a mark that only I could make on there. And it could be a very subtle thing, but when it's fired on there and it's permanent, it's going to be around for, millions of years. And even if it's broken, it'll still be there for millions of years. And I don't know what made me so excited about that, but it's kind of an interesting element to ceramics in particular.
And I imagine when you get the archaeologists and they're studying St. George thousands of years in the future, and they dig this up, how wonderful that they'll have your work right there.
Well, or they'll think, oh, what were these people doing? This is horrible work. It's interesting. When I was a kid, I grew up at Jacobs Lake. My parents owned a Jacobs Lake, not the campground, but an RV park there. And we actually owned the Jacobs Lake, which is a pond. But so when I was a kid, I explored a lot all over Arizona and southern Utah. And we used to go out on our dirt bikes and explore. And there's a place that was very unique in northern Arizona that not many people have been to. It's a wilderness area now, but when I was a kid, there was just an old, really rough dirt road to get to this area, and it's called Snake Gulch. It's a canyon that goes down into Kanab Creek. And when I was a kid, I went down there, and there was some Indian granaries that are up on the cliff. So my brother and I hiked up there to look at them. And the thing is, some people say, "Oh, well, maybe you're excited about this or that." There was corncob husks and arrowhead shards and all these things that are interesting. But the most interesting thing to me about that area was you could on the side of the cliff where the adobe wall was, you could still see the handprints and the fingerprints of the people that made that building, and that was probably 2,000 years previous. And so, to me, that's kind of exciting to know that there's a history to that. And so that's maybe one of the reasons I love to do clay, is because you create a history. It's a permanent history that even if it's broken, it'll still be there.
Well, I got to tell you, Shane, unfortunately, we are at time for the show. We're on a hard break coming up here. And I want to thank you for being a guest on here, as is the case with so many of the artists that we talk to. We're getting to understand that you are part of this community and you're expressing things about this community, and how you were mentioning your work is about your entire being, the pigeoning, I guess that's a word I just, Shakespeare did it, so can I, the pigeoning and the mountain biking and such. How wonderful that we have people who are knowledgeable of the area and part of the area, expressing parts of this area. And unfortunately, we are at time. I do hope that you'll accept an invitation if we bring you back.
Yeah,
on the
I'd
show.
love to come back sometime. It's great.
I think we just got the conversation going, really, at the 45-minute mark.
Yeah, we can talk about all kinds of things in the future.
And I'll tell you, please accept my invitation to all of our listeners to continue to explore artistic opportunities, not only things that you can learn to do yourselves or do yourselves as far as expression and such, but also look for those opportunities to hear concerts, to experience art shows, to see plays and things of that sort. As a reminder, next show will be on this coming Thursday at 2 p.m. We'll have Karen Edwards, the company manager from Tuacahn, the theater, the Broadway in the Desert, as they call themselves, and also her son, Cade. We look forward to visiting with them, and I ask that in the meantime, you keep your eyes on the arts.